Good evening. This is Mae Brussell. The title of this program is called World Watchers, and it's broadcast number 706. It's June the 17th, 1985. I got a letter from a listener up in the Bay Area, in San Jose area, and he sent me a little calendar. It says, Dear Mae, here is a little calendar that you can use to keep track of program tape numbers and dates. I have written in a couple of numbers. You can fill them in as you go. Best wishes from Mike. And up on the corner for June the 3rd, he's written 704 as an example, and June the 10th, 705. I did confuse when I went into the station the number of broadcast number 704 and did call it 703, but for all of you geniuses out there, you know the order that they go, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm sure you corrected your sheets and your tapes appropriately, but I have a little instruction here now on how to keep track of the numbers. I guess Mike has never seen the Samuel Beckett plays or the Eugene Ionesco plays, many of them where the clock is either has no hands or is faced backward against the wall. Being an existentialist, I don't even think keeping track is important, but I try out of 700 broadcasts plus 14 years on the air not to confuse you too many times. And I appreciate that little instruction booklet on how to be able to tell what day it is. Well, now we'll continue with the rest of the news. That isn't news, really. There is so much in the news that I can't ignore some of these stories, and I can't detail them now because I want to continue on the Josef Mengele story, the hoax that Mengele was dead. So I'm briefly going to give you a suggestion of 16 subjects that I will go into, some at greater length than others, but that I want to call attention to this week so that you don't think I'm ignoring them, and we'll get back to them later. One is the testimony of Mehmet Ali Agca, the trial in Rome taking place, accusing the KGB and the Bulgarians of planning the killing of John Paul II, and Mr. Agca testifying this past week that the P2, the Masonic Lodge of Licio Gelli, were planning and did take off a kidnap. They've kept someone for 2 years because they were hoping that they could release Agca and take this girl back. Her father works in the Vatican. Well, Licio Gelli was active with Mr. Franco in Spain. He headed up the Italian security police in Italy. He's a known Nazi, a member of the SS. He built the rat lines for the Nazis to escape to South America. We've done a lot of broadcasts on Licio Gelli, so most of you are familiar with that name. This is a continuation of the fascist links, the Grey Wolves, the Nazis, to the man who tried to kill John Paul II. That was in May of 1981. And why would the top Nazis supply the gun? Why would they want to get him free and be bartering at the expense of kidnapping this young person already for 2 years? And he's trying to pull a KGB plot while he's revealing the most fascist Nazi Vatican connections to the attempted shooting of the Pope. Secondly, Reverend Moon's paper put out, the publisher, Mr. de Borschgrave, they put out continuous propaganda. This week they had his entire front page, full page, with a big drawing on the destabilization of Bolivia. Reverend Moon has worked with the drug traffic people in South America, with the fascist dictatorships, and they want to get out the democracy, that frail democracy in Bolivia, and put back the cocaine kings that were continuing before and after Klaus Barbie, but have been in the hands of other people now. We've lost a huge amount of money. We, the banks in America and around the world, from curbing the cocaine traffic and not putting in their pockets. And now he's trying to promote with big poster sign sheets the disintegration of Bolivia. Also in the news, and I'll mention more of that regarding the Mengele case, Washington Post had a story this week, a long story, Klaus Barbie awaits trial. He could surface and they could begin talking about Klaus Barbie because many people thought that Mengele would be officially dead, and so simultaneously Klaus Barbie's name gets full attention. The third story has to do with $500 million missing from a Hong Kong bank. I like to follow the missing money, and this one is almost the same or equal to the Nugan Hand Bank money that was missing. And this allegedly went into Sri Lanka, which is a place for destabilizing and getting rid of the guerrilla movements and putting in a fascist dictatorship. If there isn't one already there, there's a lot of turmoil. and allegedly this money went over there. Louis Farrakhan is in the news with big articles, one saying the Jews have to be punished for what they are and what they do, and the other his fascination and adoration for Adolf Hitler. Louis Farrakhan, who just picked up $5 million from Gaddafi in Libya, and I want to go into the CIA funding Gaddafi and then breaking up our Democratic Party by splitting the votes and bringing in anti-Semitism overtly from the area of the blacks. I mentioned it briefly, I think, last week, and we'll do more on that. John Paul Getty decided the American museums didn't need any money, so he quickly allocated $62.5 million to an art gallery in Great Britain, and then he proceeded to hire Klaus Barbie, who just got acquitted, to work for him over in London. And, of course, John Paul Getty was part of the corporation that Otto von Bolschwing formed, the Gestapo and the Gehlen organization in the United States that placed Helene von Damm with Ronald Reagan. And this company, I've done many broadcasts, not for a long time on it, but the Getty name surfaces, and there were the allegations that Buell was a ring boy at Hermann Goering's wedding. He has close ties to Nazis. And Paul Getty is now the corporation. I don't know which members of the family are going to hire him in London right away. Also working for J. Paul Getty, moving to the Getty Gallery in Washington, is Franklin Murphy, who he was with the Central Intelligence Agency and then was the dean at UCLA and went on to work for the Los Angeles Times. He's going to Washington, D.C. to work for the Getty Group. The Hitler Diary trial is coming to an end. It's been going on for almost a year. They're going to close it soon. They can't account for where the millions of dollars went, although at the time they said it went for the Waffen-SS and the Hague HIAG organization that takes care of the Nazi families ever since World War II. This money from the diary went there. The Hitler Diary is important for reasons that I did 2 or 3 broadcasts on several years ago, but also in reading the details of the Mengele article, it's very interesting to take all the information that's come out in the last 10 days, and what I find there is not a personality of Josef Mengele, but an older person who's very quiet, who only sees 2 families, who has no company, doesn't go out of the house, no mail, no telephone, and he sits and writes diaries. And I wonder about those diaries that would be written up till 1979, because Hitler's diaries surfaced in 81, and I have alleged that I believe that those were authentic, and only several surfaced, and then they quickly closed the case, and they were given an examination for 2 years and said they were authentic, and then locked up, and nobody, for all purposes, can get their hands on the Hitler diaries. There's a lot of diary writing down here in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and also this week that trial is coming up and closing. There's articles about Raymond Donovan every week, and some this week, our former Secretary of Labor, that the reason they put a wiretap on him was that they were looking for who killed Jimmy Hoffa, and I did a broadcast or several on him just at the time that he was arrested and removed from the Labor Department, that he hired a man in his Chivone construction company who allegedly was responsible for the murder of Hoffa. So this is the first article I've seen linking Hoffa to the Donovan murder in terms of why they put wiretaps on him in the first place. A lot of people are interested in medical articles. I don't do enough of that. One that interests my mind this week, there were quite a few bringing back electroshock, and we'll go into that. The Soviet Union, the method of taking care of eye treatment, some very interesting things in the news. But there were studies done on whether the mind can cure cancer once you have it, your attitude, if you can put it off or prolong the disease or take care of it instead of succumbing to it. And according to some extensive reports, and I don't agree with them, but they said that the mind has no way of affecting your treatment once you get the cancer disease. But every report that I read that came out this week regarding these studies did say that you couldn't cure it once you got it, but that your mind can cause cancer. And I thought that was very interesting because of the particular people I know who have had the disease and their particular attitudes about life and family and their circumstances. And this study, this recent one this week, said that your mind could cause the cancer. Ben Stein is a writer for the Los Angeles Herald. He was on CNN talking about the movie Rambo, He was writing an editorial-type article about the New York Times when he works with the sleazy Los Angeles Herald. He's one of the most dangerous people I've ever seen. The first time I ever saw him was on television this week. I've read his stories and wondered, where is this man coming from? I understand he's a close friend of Jim Good, the man who took over Rebel magazine, who I had so much trouble with, and was wondering where Good was coming from. And at the time, I learned that Ben Stein was close to him. And I want to share with you some ideas on that movie, Rambo. That's the latest anti-Red movie that takes the place of last summer's Red Dawn, and Ben Stein's role in it and his attitudes in his articles. William Buckley had a story this week that he was wrong about the Argentine military junta. Now, this is a monumental decision of his to say that he was wrong, that he lauded them, that he said they were necessary, that the guerrillas were kidnapping, the guerrillas were stealing, that they were harmful to Argentina. In 1977, he went down there. In 1978, he was writing articles on his love affair with the military junta, and he even gave CBS 60 Minutes credit for the movie they showed on the Argentine torture and the trials going on. And I can't think of any other time when William Buckley has apologized for being wrong. Now, in order to walk when you're a baby, you have to take the first step. Maybe if William Buckley takes off his glasses, he'll see that he's been wrong about a lot of things a lot of times, as have other people, concerning these political matters, life and death and murders by our government and their cover-up, of which he is a part. But it's a giant step, a first step, to say, I was in error, and these things happened, and I failed to recognize them. Now, a long series of articles are breaking out on the West Coast, and I talked to John Judge last night in Philadelphia, and he isn't getting any of these, and I should be doing a 4 or 5 part story on these, and I will very shortly after the Mengele story is. In my mind, I'm satisfied with what I've put together. It has to do with the survivalist movement in California. A gentleman, Leonard Lake, was arrested out here just a month ago, and before the police could ask him any questions about a stolen car, he had a cyanide bullet, and he bit the bullet, literally, and died. And then they went to his property up north in the northern area of California, about 125 miles north of San Francisco, and put together that he and Charles Ng, NG, were part of an operation they call the Survivalists, but it's more than that. Their house has been compared to the Nazi bunkers in Germany. Now, this is the first time I've seen the word Nazi bunkers in the United States. We heard about the bunker of the Move people in Philadelphia, but they referred and have been writing about the death squads, that they brought people, a man and woman and their child, and another woman and her child, and what they've been doing is bringing them to the property up in Northern California and taking pictures of them with sexual fantasies and abuses, and then they release them on the property. There's quite a lot of acreage there, and then shoot them like animals. Now, I said that John Connally, former Secretary of the Navy, former governor of Texas, was named on tapes having to do with the Klan, the Nazis in Texas, and the men that were going to invade Dominica Island, and they were going to import blacks to shoot them and hunt shooting live people running for their life. Well, these are Americans living in the South Bay, San Jose, San Francisco, put ads in the paper to sell video sets or sell cars, something they have to sell. And these men pick them up and take the whole family. The cars are left. They don't need the cars. Now, these same group, there's a woman involved who wants protection or security from the law, and she'll talk. Her name is Caroline Balaz, B-A-L-A-Z-S. She was married to Leonard Lake, and she knew and was participating in these things. I hope they don't give her immunity, because there is enough to include her in all these crimes. But they show pictures of Leonard Lake and Carolyn, and they refer to them and Charles Ng as the ninja, the soldiers of fortune. That one of the things they've done is taken large amounts of weapons out of military bases. The ninja is the Japanese group that kill for the fun of it, that go out and kill for no motive, that hunt and get people and practice just the art of killing, like you shoot deer or whatever men go out or women do and go out and shoot. They refer to them as into medieval fantasies, but the ninja advertises that book is In Soldier of Fortune, in Survival, published by Robert Brown, who works with the State Department, works with the military, with John Singlab that I've talked about. This connects to all of these various groups that I've been trying to illustrate: the domestic Central Intelligence Agency, Nazi Defense Department, killing teams who are working in this country. This is just one story that broke, but I'm sure these missing people all over the country and the story of how they disappeared will all connect. Now, pictured on a map in the San Francisco Examiner are various faces that have come out of this geographical area that worked up here, lived up here, got started. One was Reverend Sun Myung Moon with his colonies up in this area. Charles Manson. Remember, I did a story on the shooting of Joe Cooper for the National Examiner on the Manson case and his friends in Northern California. Jim Jones from up there, Kenneth Parnell, who kidnapped a young boy and had him as a homosexual slave for around 12 years. Lewis Johnson, who had a van down outside of South San Francisco with Tara Burke and the sexual abuses that went on with this child and another little boy. The boys in jail. And Rios Montt, who went on to Guatemala to head that country, that dictatorship, all nurtured out of this same milieu. Now, these people are, for all you think they're crazy, but they are part of our establishment, work with the law enforcement, police, and have been protected, and are working their way up to the highest echelons of our government. A very scary story, and it's much too long now to detail a lot of it, but I'll be doing that very shortly with you. The survivalists in California. The Lakes took goats, and a lot of these survivalist magazines advertised getting goats and how to use them for milking. They took 2 goats and made the unicorn that was the star attraction in New York City, the Ringling Brothers that's traveling around. Mr. Lake was a barker. He met Carolyn at the Renaissance fairs we have here in California, Northern California, and Southern California. During the hippie days, they were recruiting sexual partners and hippies from the Berkeley Barb. They are from the Marines. The 2 guys, Lake and Eng, were in the Marines. When Eng was in a prison, a stockade in Hawaii, he was recruited through the survivalist magazines to connect up with Lake. They use those magazines, and they're mercenaries that can go out and kill. So you get all the connections of the way the Aryan nations, the Aryan Brotherhood, works through the prisons, how they get their weapons, how they're making killing a hobby. And right now, I don't think there's any black people. These are all white middle-class people that they're practicing killing, and then later they'll sharpen their knives and go after the Jews and blacks. Now, I want to also, there's 3 or 4 more stories I want to just mention that I'll go on to later. One is the sale of TWA. The German stewardess, I don't know if you saw the broadcast on CNN, Ronald Reagan or the powers that be want to give her a congressional medal. The hijacking case is taking place right now. When the 2 hijackers got on the plane and started their business, they asked her. She spoke German, and one of them spoke German, and they assured her that they would never hurt her. They're sympathetic to Germany. That a fluent German-speaking Shiite is on this airplane, and he asked the stewardess to go down the aisle to each person and get their passports and select who she thought were the Jews on the plane. Instead of saying to the hijackers, this is a United States airplane, they're citizens of the United States, they're all equal. Instead of saying that, she pulled the passports and told them who she thought the Jews were, speaking German to the hijacker, and then those 7 or 8 Jews were separated from all the other people with the help of the stewardess on the airplane. And when they came home, she was the superstar yesterday, Sunday, of the press conference of the stewardesses, and 4 of them were in plain white uniforms, little mousy standing over at the side, and then one's in a print dress, the German superstar, who is suggested to get the Congressional Medal for her heroism when she turns over this list. In fact, they compared her on the television, whether you saw it or not or read it in the paper, to being just like Josef Mengele. Like, I think this is a Jew, this isn't, this is a Jew, this isn't. Sure, hijacker, I'll give you the Jews. Fine, you're cute, we'll be nice to you, go on home. I want to talk about the TWA and the sale of it. Also, the spy scandal, the continuing information of the Ku Klux Klan, and the links of the members of the Walker family and so forth to the CIA, the Klan, and who were they stealing the secrets of our Navy for? Were they really for the KGB, just like they said Agca was trying to shoot the Pope for the KGB, or again, are the nuclear submarine details and facts going to the right-wing group that these people are associated with and not to the KGB at all? And finally, I want to just mention two articles briefly and then get on with the story of Josef Mengele because there is so much. Ed Asner's home was painted with swastikas this week. They had a sign up there about the Jew, mentioning his religion, painted on the house, Heil Hitler, telephone calls, kill the Jews. Ed Asner's home was defaced by swastikas. I wonder when Bill Graham from San Francisco and Ed Asner from Los Angeles will ever say, well, let's see Mae Brussell, let's see what she's got on this. Because a friend of Ed Asner's, a personal friend, was at the home, a mutual friend, and he asked me to send a whole notebook of sheets of past broadcasts that I did send to Ed Asner. When I came home from New York in March, he was on the airplane, and I came back on. I asked him, what did he ever do with these sheets? Did he use them? Oh, no, he hasn't read them yet. He's going to wait a while. He's going to talk and go down to Nicaragua and do all the usual politicking while they're painting his house now with swastikas and Heil Hitler, kill the Jews. And didn't the Aryan nation say starting May the 1st, all hell would break loose? Here we have the hijacker situation in the Middle East. Now, incidentally, the two goals of the hijacking situation, one is to look for a thread of connection between the hijackers and Khomeini so we can invade Iran. We need an excuse to invade Iran, just as Hitler needed an excuse to go into Poland. And we're going to create that, whether through disinformation or whatever, because Henry Kissinger and Mr. Eagleberger and all of our State Department want the territory back that their dear darling Shah had, S-H-A-H, the Shah of Iran, and we're going to use the kidnappings or the hostage crisis to invade there. And also, by taking an airplane that leaves Greece, and this happened before, they could pay off and have agents working at the airport. They get on with these machine guns and weapons and so forth, and then blame Andres Papandreou. The democracies of Bolivia, of India, of Greece are always under attack by our country. Don't you think it's strange that the democracies are enemies? And so the whole hostage crisis is also to get even with Israel. They shouldn't have those Shiites there. They arrested them without a trial. There actually are 700 or 800 hostages in Israel. Israel acts like a barbarian nation. They rounded them up. They shouldn't have them. So they're calling attention to Israel, and they'll use Iran and use Greece and get us into a larger scale action in the Middle East. That is the goal. But with a fluent German, and the hijackers' the ages range from 20 to 37, and at first they tried to say that they were all young boys. Well, now on to the Josef Mengele story. The newspapers in Germany are printing material that was repeated in the San Francisco Chronicle this morning. Papers say Mengele alive. He's not very well, but he's alive. Two West German newspapers, the Bild am Sonntag, B-I-L-D, then small a-m, then capital S-O-N-N-T-A-G, and another newspaper, Welt am Sonntag, W-E-L-T, and then small a-m and the same capital S-O-N-N-T-A-G. Both were quoting various sources and from the Mossad that Josef Mengele is around. He is alive. As I say, he isn't very well. He's sick. They say he has cancer. Mossad agents have pictures of him in Santa Cruz, Bolivia in 1980. He was spotted in Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, and now lives in Paraguay. He drives a white Mercedes number 450. They know his license plate and know that he is alive. The date of 1980 of being seen in Bolivia, Paraguay, and Argentina and Uruguay is very important. Before I go into those dates, because I do want to do a little bit about the chronology of these events, I want to share with you the way I'm filing the Mengele story so that you understand the sections that I'm choosing to use today and what, because of necessity, I have to leave out because of the time. I've broken down the Mengele subject so far into 30 different topics, and as I take a news item, starting with the very first day that they said he died in 1979, I take all the dates out of every article, extract the 8 dates, and put them into chronology. And every name that is used or position of the person being quoted, I put that in alphabetical order under names. I'll go over a list of categories that I've broken this case down to, and then the ones that I'll just cover this evening, because of course there isn't time to do all of them now. But I think it's important for you to know, when I pull stories out on Josef Mengele, what we haven't covered yet, and which necessarily connects to other events, or else I wouldn't bring them up. I take the chronology of the dates of every article that has a date on it, of every person that it mentions, and when they left the country, when they came to Brazil, when they got a job at a certain place, and put them into chronological order and keep charts of the year and the month, and fit them into time sequence. And I'm going into more of that in a few minutes. Then take the names and their jobs and positions. And then the third section I broke down and hope to share this evening is how the leak story came, how the break came that Mengele was buried in 1985. He was buried, how the leak broke in 1985, but how he was buried in 1979 down in Brazil. Then the account of his death, how he actually died, who was with him, who were the witnesses, and that involves the Bossart family and various people at a beach town about 90 miles east of Sao Paulo. Then Brazil, the 1985 elections, what was going on in the politics of Brazil, and I've done quite a bit with you on 2 broadcasts about that, and the scandals taking place at the time that the Mengele body is supposed to be surfacing in this time sequence. Also the politics in Germany right now with Helmut Kohl, Mr. Richard von Weizsäcker as president of Germany, the effect of Bonn politics on the decisions to end the Mengele case now, following on the heels of the Bitburg, the resurrection of the Waffen-SS as a heroic group of young people forced to fight like our Americans, and all is forgiven. Then the next topic is Police Chief Romeo Tumo of Sao Paulo. I mentioned him last week in conjunction with protecting one of the top Nazis, Mr. Wagner, not extraditing him to Germany. The next one after that is the money tree. Who delivers the money to Mengele, because we're talking about the International Odessa, the Swiss banks, the couriers, how the money is transferred down to a specific country, in this case, which is Brazil. The next are the drug connections between Germany, United States, Klaus Barbie, Josef Mengele. Next is evidence. Every piece of evidence that has to do with the body, like the teeth, the pelvic bone, the bones, the structure, the height, the evidence, the hard facts of the body is at Mengele's. And then the other evidence, which is all hearsay and El Junco, the diary, the letters, the photographs that have no significance at all. They prove Josef Mengele lived in Brazil. They don't prove that he died in Brazil. There's a big difference. Next is the Wolfgang Gerhard family, their Nazi connections, very important family from Vienna, who still pass around bars of Jew soap that was made from Jewish bodies at the time of the concentration camps. I hope. Maybe they're still making it, like the survivalists up north. We don't know. But they're bars of Jew soap. Next, the Gita and Geza Stammer family, Gita is her name, Geza, Geza, is his name, from Hungary to South America, and the Nazi connections. The next is the Odessa in Brazil, finally recognized as existing in Brazil because of the Mengele story. The next category is the Mengele family in Germany, their connections, currently, past, and with the story going on now. The following after that is the CIA holding back evidence on the drugs on Mengele, not only the drug connections, which they knew about in 1972 and 79, but currently, as evidenced in Jack Anderson's newsletters. John Judge called me from Pennsylvania and said Jack Anderson was complaining in his newsletter how the CIA is holding back information on the current Josef Mengele. The next subject category that I have put together is on the cemetery, the burial accounts. One is the death at the beach, which is quite different than the care of the cemetery, the visitors, the way he was buried, and the accounts of the cemetery in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Next is media manipulation. The next subject is doubts and discrepancies that cover most in all of these fields, but where the doubts are coming from and why. And then Simon Wiesenthal, the Anti-Defamation League, and the hip bone story, which I will be getting into with you in detail. The identification or pleading with Wiesenthal to give pictures of Josef Mengele's hip, when in Germany or anywhere else in the world they have no record of it, and the discrepancies, either he had a car accident, or either it was a war accident, or either it was something else. There's no record anywhere, actually, of anything happening to his hip. Then the United States rolled separate from the CIA of Klaus Barbie and Josef Mengele, and Hans Sedlmeier, Sedlmeier, gets his own category because it goes doubly under the money tree, but also him as a personality, who he is and what he's doing. He was the manager of the Mengele factory in Günzburg, Germany. Then a section on the safe houses. I've located 7 safe houses that Mengele could live in. There's a lot more, but done 7. We'll take a 1-minute break, and I'll continue with the categories that I will be going into eventually, but why I single them out now. I'll take a few out of this group and show you just in general the kind of material that I've been putting together for the last 10 days. This is Mae Brussell. In case you missed the first part of the broadcast, the program is a 1-hour broadcast called World Watchers. It is broadcast number 706, June the 17th, 1985. I'm sure Mike McGovern will be very proud of me remembering the date and the number. The reason I'm listing these subject categories is to show you how I take a given subject that is very important in terms of connecting past research and for future operations, and extract from all the articles that have come out the last 10 days information that falls into its own subject categories. I retype an article and then cut it up and paste it, scotch tape it into various sections. If one article pertains to the pelvic bone, and another how he died, and another how Mr. Bossart rented a house to him, or another about a housekeeper that took care of him and he was separated from the other people, I extract from one article and put the date of each article on those sections and cut it up and then tape it so each subject tells its own story. Now, I have one section here on the pelvic bone. It also doubles up to Simon Wiesenthal with x-rays allegedly of Mengele, because this was the turning point of the story on KGO News, ABC Radio, out here in San Francisco. The grandchild of Wolfgang Gerhardt, grandchildren of Wolfgang Gerhardt in Germany, in Austria rather, said that their grandmother had a broken hip, that she was crippled and had a broken hip, and that this body, allegedly Josef Mengele, was in the same coffin, and it could have been confused with her grandmother's. And after that, the whole tone of the investigation began to slow down. There are also possible Syrian connections to our CIA, to the Vatican and Rome. Various people here, names and locations could be subject for further investigation. A segment on Nazi burials, the traditional way of burying Nazi war criminals, so you can resurface them years later, 20, 30 years later, and say, here they are. And then the Hungarian connections, the Buell family connections, the Fritz Steinecker category, that's the attorney for Josef Mengele, and then certain changes that are taking place now in the last 10 days, just as the story about Mengele broke. So I'll add more categories if necessary, but that's a list of the subjects, and I'll just go into 3 or 4 areas that I've described here as having their own category and share those with you now. Now, as far as the doubts, the section under doubts or questions, the large letters of one newspaper on January the 12th, that's not too long ago, that was just last Wednesday, said, United States, Bonn, Germany, tell doubts of Mengele's death yarn. And this is a story of how the evidence isn't fitting together, the family is giving no proof, and that was the first large article of a front line headline type that said the United States and Germany don't believe it. And Bonn, Germany, and the United States were the 2 countries that were pushing this Mengele story to get it over with, and they're forced to say, even though they're very anxious to find that that was Josef Mengele, by this date just a week after the story broke, 6 days later, saying there's nothing there. 3 days after the story broke, the Miami Herald had a long story. It was sent to me from David Miller in Florida, saying, despite the evidence, the doubts remain. And this is a full-page article that I'll detail with you under the category of doubts on why it isn't Josef Mengele. This out of the Miami Herald, that saying, and there's a lot of people down in Florida that work with the CIA, that work with the drug connections that are linked to William Hetrick and the California, the international drug connections that live down there, and they get a message from the newspaper too, and a full-page story having their doubts. Now, there was an interview with Fritz Steinecker, Josef Mengele's attorney, it was reprinted in the San Jose Mercury. Mengele's attorney still in service. Frankfurt, West Germany. The power of attorney signed by Josef Mengele has never been rescinded and remains in fact, despite this alleged death in 1979 of Josef Mengele. Fritz Steinecker, the Frankfurt attorney, said he still represents Josef Mengele. It's never been rescinded. No one from the family ever rescinded the power of attorney. This is a guy who's supposed to be dead 6 years ago that he's representing. He says he can act on behalf of Mengele under certain circumstances. He performs unspecified legal services on Mengele's behalf. No past tense. This is a June the 11th. He couldn't answer why Mengele would need an attorney if he was dead 6 years, and he refused to comment. He said he didn't know if his client was alive or dead. He hasn't been in contact with the Mengele family. Now, he may not be telling the truth. He could say for the last hour. That's the way Jack Ruby broke down a polygraph test by the hours. He hasn't been in contact with the family. We don't know when. He evaded questions, according to this article, about whether he dealt directly with Mengele. Asked if the power of attorney is usually rescinded after one's death, he said, yes, that would be better, naturally, but one can also let it go to sleep. He didn't understand, he couldn't understand the family refusal to confirm the death a long time ago, and he said maybe they don't have the necessary documents to say it's true. He was given the power of attorney 18 years ago, and he still represents the interest of Josef Mengele in terms of the family, as a member of the family, and his private interest. Now, interestingly enough, this past week there was an article, Cloud of Suspicion Lingers Over Relatives of Angel of Death. This was June the 9th, 1985, in the San Francisco Chronicle, and it has to do about the questioning the members of the Mengele family and the trips to South America and Mengele's marriages. And then the article says, the last paragraph, Franz Josef Strauss, and he is the head of the Bavarian section of Germany, the most pro-Nazi of all the politicians in Germany. Franz Josef Strauss was in Israel recently, and they asked him, is it true that he was transferring money to a Swiss account for Josef Mengele? If Mr. Steinecker or Strauss knew about the money going to a Swiss bank account, the family quickly labeled the allegations as lies, and the Bavarian government later said there is no evidence payments have been made. Now, Mr. Strauss may not have evidence that payments were paid out, but of course I'd been in touch with the Wiesenthal Center and people in law enforcement around the country, and I'm sure this went on. I can't remember whether it was sent to the Mossad. I think I did back in 1983. Was asking about Mr. Fritz Steinecker putting money in the Swiss accounts of Mengele. I'll have to look up my correspondence and records there. But here they ask the staunchest Nazi from Bavaria about money in Swiss banks' accounts for Josef Mengele, and this is the first time I've seen that in the newspapers, and it came out this week. Our Monterey Herald had a story yesterday in large black letters, interesting, for the first time that I've ever seen this. Mengele case revives the theories linking Brazil to international network of Nazis. Now, I've been on the air 14 years here in this local community, and all of a sudden comes a story. I guess it's titled under Peter Muello, M-U-E-L-L-O, so it doesn't have a wire service heading on it, but it refers to the network of the Odessa, the breakdown of the international Nazi organization, and that in the case of looking for Josef Mengele, they were hitting upon this international Nazi network known as the Odessa, called Comrades Association. It translates the Odessa organization from the 1940s and 50s, and their work in South America. And they referred again to Nazi officer Gustav Wagner, who was arrested in Sao Paulo, Brazil, who wasn't arrested, but who went to the police for protection, and other Nazis down in that area. But this was in our Monterey Herald. I quickly wrote a letter to the editor titled Mengele Revives Theories, and this is what I wrote. Bravo. The Monterey Peninsula, June 16, 1985, published the account of Brazil's links to the international network of Nazis. This revealing article referred to the Odessa organization. Odessa was formed after World War II in order to provide escape routes, false identification, and employment of the Waffen-SS and Nazi war criminals. The goal of the Odessa was the continuation and resurrection of the Fourth Reich. For 12 years on KLRB-FM and 2 years on KAZU-FM, I have consistently documented the chain of the Odessa network from Nazi Germany into the United States Pentagon, intelligence system, and throughout every facet of our government. Often referred to as a conspiracy theorist, what I have shared in my articles and radio broadcasts are the facts about the Odessa. The recent exposures regarding the survivalist murders in Northern California or the Aryan nations in Idaho are only the tip of the USA Odessa. The most shocking aspect of my 21 years of research has been the thunderous silence of the Jewish community on the Monterey Peninsula. Whatever comes around when the next Holocaust begins is going to be well-deserved. Escapist Jews in Germany have their Mengele twins right here. This time there was no excuse. The tragedy is compounded by silence and collusion. Signed, Mae Brussell. We'll see if the Herald prints it as is. Another article by Alan Riding in the New York Times this past week, June the 11th, on the affairs, the Mengele affairs down in Brazil, refers to the organization of the Odessa. And Mr. Tumo, the police chief, is telling why these people collaborated and hid the Boserts and the Stammer family and others who had the Nazis down there, and he described them as collaborators, protecting them. And he said, in quotes, if you are part of the clandestine structure, what interest would you have in revealing their whereabouts? It is probable that Odessa has some role. Odessa is the acronym to describe the organization of former Nazi SS officers. And he went on to describe what the Odessa is and why they were housed down there. So the New York Times this week and the Monterey Herald this week are talking about an organization and a network of people that I have been trying to document and link together for you for a long, long time. Now, if any of you don't have a back broadcast, August the 1st, 1983, that is a very important one, as it was number 608, and then the 609 and 610 followed. I did a chart or a diagram of the Odessa, of the Nazi organization in the United States, and its links to John DeLorean, Klaus Barbie, Josef Mengele, the Zurich banks, and one of the names in there that I have included involving Bolivia has to do with Helene von Damm, and I suggest, rather than repeat all those names to you, that you either send for the sheets, they're 25 cents each, for 3 sheets from 3 broadcasts at that period. Send a self-addressed stamped envelope to Mae Brussell, P.O. Box 22511, Carmel 93922. And what you'll get is a diagram of the Nazis in Brazil and in Bolivia and in the United States government and their role throughout the highest echelons of our government that I was referring to in the letters to the editor. Now, while I've been documenting all this material for the past 10 days, there have been some changes. I call them changes or shifting sands. One event causes another to take a different move or a stature, and I believe they have some relationship to what is taking place. A few changes I just cited was a trip that the Stemmer family, the father and the son, took. He's in the Merchant Marines. They sailed out of Brazil and left and went to Singapore and Japan. And I believe that if Mengele was there at all recently, or if they wanted to get him off of the continent of South America, he would be on that ship and would be protected in Asia or in a Middle Eastern city after that. that the Stammers could protect him all this time. They could see that he got out when the heat was on and take it off of Mr. Strassner in Paraguay. Another change is that Helene von Damm, our ambassador to Vienna, I heard on KGO, I haven't read it in print yet, is soon to be fired as the ambassador to Vienna, and the news account had something to do with her husband, Peter Gertler, Gurtler, Gertler, from Vienna, Austria, the home base of the Wolfgang Gerhard family and a lot of people of the Odessa network to South America. Lev Dobriansky is fired as ambassador to the Bahamas. Of course, Ronald Reagan used the excuse of changing the ambassadors like John Gavin of Mexico and so forth. Dobriansky, Helene von Damm, they're all under important possible investigations. Their names have been smoked out, such as the attorney Fritz Steinecker. The way I pushed this thing just for 2 years, trying to get him visible, and he became visible. Well, a lot of good researchers and people have done work on the Ukrainian Quarterly, the World Anti-Communist League, John Singlaub, and Lev Dobriansky. And so Ronald Reagan can't pull them one by one out, so he said automatically last week, he had said every ambassador, with the exception of 4, will stay in place, and I'll give them just a few years and then rotate them for some prestigious thing. He doesn't say, look, you're embarrassing me, Gavin, come home from Mexico. Look, Dobriansky, you're being written up in these papers. What's going on? And as a matter of fact, one of the ones that was to stay in was Helene von Damm. She was one of 3 or 4 that was assured a continuation. Then lo and behold, as the Mengele story develops, for whatever the connections or what, I understand she's on the way home. Another transaction or movement with these people I mentioned last week or the week before, Gordon Novell going to London to get money for John DeLorean. And then Washington Post, June the 7th, a full long-page story, the Klaus Barbie article, Klaus Barbie trials ready to start. And then the statement of General Alfred Strassner from Paraguay that he would cancel his trip to Germany. He was going up to see Mr. Strauss and Helmut Kohl, and that is canceled. And he will stay down in Paraguay and not have to answer any questions about what is taking place. But Mr. Strauss, one of the members he was to see, worked with George Bush and Michael Townley on Task Force 157. He's the man who was asked in Israel about the Swiss bank accounts of Josef Mengele and the connections of our Central Intelligence Agency to our current vice president, to these death squads, is a tangled web that I have tried to dissect and understand. Strassner has canceled his trip, and he will stay close to home for the time being. So a lot of people who have possible connections to all of these events, at least that I think I can document, are moving around or staying put, whichever way you interpret it, but their names are in the news in some kind of a change in their lives. Now, last week I talked about that police chief who was 100% sure it was Josef Mengele. His name is Romeo Tumo, Romeu Tuma, from Sao Paulo. Well, the Los Angeles Times had a story that didn't go over the wire services. Dapper Brazilian investigator is canny, C-A-N-N-Y, and controversial. This is about Mr. Tumo. And it goes into the fact that he worked as a police chief down in Brazil for 33 years. When the military dictatorship took over as of 1964, the American police state dictatorship, he made his career as an intelligence officer in the feared political police force. It's known as the DOPS, DOPS. The letters, it spells out a Portuguese term for this particular team. Now, that team is similar to the SAVAK, the torturous, murderous team in Iran, the BOSS, the BOSS in South Africa, SAVAK. These are all initials like CIA, SAVAK, BOSS, the DINA, the DINA in Chile. Okay, the police force that he had, the treacherous force, was the DOPS, and they were charged under his group while he was working there with brutality, with political torture, with abuse of human rights, and murder. And, of course, in 1979, he could select a particular man. He was even much younger, he was 53, but they put a man in this grave and called him Josef Mengele. When Mengele had to disappear from that area at that exact time period, this man had a lot of people that could take his place, just as Martin Bormann went through the concentration camps in Germany looking for 2 people that most strongly resembled him and then duplicating their dental work, putting their dental pictures in the labs in Germany, burying those men, killing them, and burying them, and put their dental work away so it would match their teeth when they were exhumed to prove that Martin Bormann was dead. Now, in 1977, Romeo Tumo moved from just being a police officer from the intelligence to the commander of the police force. This is all the time that the narcotics traffic and so forth was going on, and the reunion of the top Nazis down there in Sao Paulo. And then the police chief, secret police, was dissolved. In 1983, DOPS was dissolved because an election was coming. The new government of Tancredo Neb, that I've been talking about, Tancredo, who was murdered before he was inaugurated, and Mr. Sarney, who was with the military dictatorship up till a year before he ran for vice president. So what we have here is the former chief of the intelligence police of the death torturous squads running the Sao Paulo Police Department, and the current president of Brazil reaffirmed his position so that he was in a place to dig up this body of so-called Josef Mengele. And the New York Times had a story June the 10th about Mr. Tumo and his role in helping arrest top Nazi Wagner. And they said he helped find this top Nazi. The truth was that Wagner went to him for protection. The New York Times says Mr. Tumo, who was approved of his job in Brazil by the current civilian government, they were sure to bring that up, took part in the 1978 arrest of Nazi fugitive Gustav Wagner. What it doesn't say is that he refused the extradition. It says the extradition was denied by Brazil's Supreme Court, but Mr. Tumo was behind that also. So this is the very controversial police chief who said right off from the first day, I'm 100% sure that this is Josef Mengele, and he was ready to close the case. That is the very canny, controversial police chief. Now, just quickly, in the last few minutes, I want to run down the necessity for burying Josef Mengele, just a few items on why in 1979 they had to officially bury him, and how then he went on to Uruguay, Paraguay, where all the sightings took place. And up in Westchester, New York, all the sightings of Mengele come on from 79 up to the present time, and he had to leave Brazil. Briefly, in 1972 and in 1979, the CIA had documents saying that Josef Mengele was involved with narcotic traffic. They first surfaced in 1972, according to the New York Times, February the 12th, 1975. And Tommaso Buccetti, the Italian that I mentioned last week, the mafia chief from Brazil, was sent back to Italy on drug charges and then returns in 1980 to Brazil. It comes back from Italy to 1980. In 1977 to 1979, Mengele had his own cottage there in Brazil, and that's when Rolf Mengele, his son, came to visit him. That is that time period is when Wolfgang Gerhardt dies officially. Back in Austria, he's given Mengele his personal IDs to travel and to be burying that person. He leaves with the ID of himself, his name, and everything with Josef Mengele in 78 rather, and then he's to go on to Austria and die, and that ID will go with Josef Mengele then to the cemetery. In 1978, Gustav Franz Wagner was arrested, and the attention of the world was in Sao Paulo, Brazil, with Mr. Tumo because of that birthday party of Hitler's that I mentioned, because of the photographs, because of the arrest. In 1978, Sao Paulo was humming with Nazis and world opinion in 4 countries wanting to extradite Mr. Wagner, and all these appeals going on. The next year, in 1979, the CIA wrote a report that Josef Mengele is heavily involved in narcotics traffic, and they also made note in that memo in 1979 that they thought the money was coming from Hans Settelmeyer from the Mengele factory in Günzburg down to South America. The CIA knew that in 1979. So the minute they knew where the money tree was coming, shaking the money tree, they had to cut that off, and I imagine that's when Mr. Fritz Steinecker then took money through the Swiss banks with the power of attorney, because they had, between the Nazis down in Sao Paulo and the narcotics connections, they had to officially bury Josef Mengele. So in 1979, with his friends, the Bisserts, they arranged a trip to their home, their summer place, or February, but summer down there for him for a swimming trip that I'll go into with you in more detail later. But he goes to the beach, and what happens is, and I'll detail for you next week, the discrepancies in the death, the discrepancies in the autopsy. He's with a friend of his, and he's going to go down to Bertioga Beach, Bertioga, and this is a story of Ralph Blumenthal from the New York Times, June the 14th. And he's very nervous, and he tells his neighbor, he's distraught, the neighbor says, who knows him and is friendly with him, and he tells about various near accidents he almost had that week, and he's in trouble. He always is called Mr. Pedro, and he says to this person, in quotes, "I am going to the beach because my life is ending." And the New York Times had a story June the 11th, another June 14th, another quotation, "I'm going to go because my life is at an end anyway." So he goes over to the beach with the Boserts, these avowed Nazis, and takes a dip in the water. One account is that Mr. Bossert almost died trying to save him. The other is that he was only waist high in water. Another account says that the man on the beach that they saw when they were helping him was clean-shaven and went there clean-shaven. The other accounts were that he had a unusual bushy mustache. The one that they usually had, Mengele, had a mustache, and he was down in Brazil with these families, not all the time, but on and off in Brazil, and he knows that he has to die. Well, why does he say his life is ending at that point? He has to end it now because the CIA has Hans Sedlmayr's address. They have the connections of Josef Mengele's money, which is the Odessa, and at that point they have to make some decisions, and the cocaine connections that are heavily funded by people in the United States buying that cocaine, such as John DeLorean going from William Hettrick's trips to South America to pick up cocaine that can save the DeLorean Motor Company. So what happened is they have a man who they say had a stroke. He's 53 years old, according to the cemetery. The man who buried him, the death certificate says age 53. Josef Mengele was 14 years older than that man. The Mrs. Bossert feigns a big attack of grief that you can't open the body. There's no autopsy. Mr. Tumo's police, the former head of the counterintelligence, with all those connections of terror and death squads, allows no autopsy. The body is buried. She feigns this terrible emotional scene, so no coffin is opened after they say he's 53. Nobody can see it, and he's buried as Mr. Gerhard, who passed away a year before in Austria, and he's known down there as Mr. Gerhard. He uses the name Gerhard from 75 to 79, 1975 to 79, so that he can be buried as Gerhard. That's why there's two, one in Austria, the one who has the Jew soap and puts the swastikas on his Christmas tree, and Josef Mengele. So Mengele can leave Brazil and be taken out of there now. And of course, there's any number of routes on boats, ships, airplanes, and leave there because one gentleman buried under the name in Wolfgang isn't going to be, Gerhard isn't going to be examined in Austria, and he has lots of IDs. He has them anyway. The reason he had the double IDs and he didn't really look like him is that he was living in town under that name. Then they buried him under that name, but the body in the coffin isn't anything like that. And all of this took place, this is in February of 79 when all of this is brewing, officially on the certificate. It says he died that date. I really wonder if the actual burial wasn't a little bit later because, the days don't matter too much actually. The arrest of Wagner was in April of 78 there, so of February 79. Josef Mengele is officially buried. From there, he is seen with his nephew, Dieter Mengele, up in New Jersey, Westchester County. The Mengele factory, for which Mr. Hans Sedlmayr carried the money and was funding him down in South America, funding the known Odessa. He goes up to Westchester County in New York, and he's seen upstate New York. I have all the back issues of Life magazine going almost to the very beginning, and they're out in my garage. I'm going to have to go through there next week and find the box. They're separated by years, the 1979 box, and just find the Josef Mengele story. But the tractor people have their factories in the United States, just like I.G. Farben did. They have them in Germany and all over South America and goodness knows where. So after that, he's seen upstate New York. Then he's seen again in Argentina, where he went when the war was over before he moved to Paraguay. And then he can go to Paraguay, and he can be seen in Chile, he can be seen in Uruguay. So that after 1979, he isn't seen anymore in Brazil. He can't go back to Brazil. That's officially over. And Josef Mengele then can work with the Odessa from these other countries. And the discrepancy of who was on the beach, it was a different person. The age of the person who died, the way he died, was it in deep water and Mr. Bossert almost died with him, or was it shallow water to the waist? Was it a man with a beard or a clean face? Was it the same age? No, 14 years age difference. And the same people who housed him and gave him a safe house where they didn't live. He didn't live with these people. He had his own place so the Nazis could come and go. And then he tells his friend, I'm going to the beach because my life is ending. Now, that might be a good Nazi, too. And he says, au revoir, adieu, buddy, it's over. Nobody came to the funeral. It was an unkempt grave. The Bosserts never went back. And supposedly they cherished him, they idealized him, they loved him. They never picked a weed off the grave after that. It was a fait accompli. That was the end of Mengele. Now, I did want to get into how this story broke from May till the first story of May 1985, May 25th, how they got the address of the Bosserts and the Stammers at this time to pull out the Mengele story. I'll do that next week because my time is up. But the network of these people, as I say, I'm breaking down the safe houses, the money tree. I've worked very hard on this for 10 days. I'm very satisfied with the way it went, the way it came together. I wasn't looking for any particular thing, but the newspapers talking about the Odessa and his being alive, that I know is important and is the final punchline of the whole story. But the hour's up now, so I'll continue more on this next week and detail a few of the other important articles in the news and be back with you. And this is Mae Brussell from Pacific Grove, California.